Welcome back to Presspass. Now, on the 6th of May, the government disbanded the Department of Refugee Affairs, that is DRA, and indicating that this would be followed by the closure of Daadab and Kakuma camps as soon as possible. This has elicited a lot of response from the international community and humanitarian agencies. And the general appeal is for the government to observe humanitarian standards and laws and agreements and be systematic in the repatriation with consideration to the refugees' fate once they are back in their countries. Now, Sheila Sindeo filed this report on Wednesday and gives this context on this story.
The government says the Daadab refugee camp that hosts more than 500,000 Somali refugees has attained iconic status, representing the country's open-hearted response to those fleeing war and persecution in the region. It, however, claims that some of the largest terrorist attacks that have killed thousands and led to frequent travel warnings by the Western countries have been executed from Daadab.
In 2013, we agreed with UNHCR and with the government of Somalia that we will begin this process, and we had a time frame. We have an agreement that's actually expiring sometime in September this year, and we have done absolutely nothing to implement that agreement. It's not Kenya's responsibility. It's an international obligation.
Kenya says the camps have caused a huge environmental damage that hurts local communities, as they were built for only a fraction of the population that's currently hosted there. The country is also concerned about the fall-off in the voluntary international funding for the camps in favor of refugees headed to the Western countries, and has accused the West of double standards.
Refugees on this continent receive much less than refugees elsewhere. You just have to go and look at what kind of housing was even provided for Yugoslav refugees, right? For other refugees, and I'll not mention countries. And then look at the type of housing that's provided for African refugees, right? It's actually something that has been very painful for us in government to watch and see.
A consortium of NGOs giving help to the refugees says the directive to shut down the camps violated the general principle of repatriation and exposes to suffering the thousands of refugees and asylum seekers, a majority of whom are women and children. These NGOs want the government to rethink its position for the continued protection of the rights of those affected. Meanwhile, Amnesty International says it will, on the 19th of May this year, publish the first ever Refugees Welcome Index, a global survey of more than 27,000 people, and that ranks 27 countries based on their willingness to accept refugees into their countries, their towns, their neighborhoods, and their homes. Kenya is among the 27 countries in the index, but maintains that the security of its citizens is paramount, a decision that can be forgiven at a time that many countries are limiting the number of refugees entering their borders due to security concerns. Sheila Sindeo, NTV.
And that's the context as is now. And Frederick Kome, the advocacy officer for the Refugee Consortium of Kenya, is here to bear the facts right and also give the position of the refugee agencies, or those working with the refugees. As you've seen the story, there are some narratives around it that you have come to just clarify on. So, as you've seen it play, what are your concerns?
Thank you, Mark. I have been waiting patiently.
Finally, your time has come.
For my turn, I think it took long. Our position is that there were three parties that came into agreement. The agreement is called a tripartite agreement.
Yes.
The three parties are the government of Kenya, the government of Somalia, and UNHCR. Each of the parties has obligations in this tripartite agreement. If you look at what the minister said, she talks about the question of implementation of the tripartite agreement. In 2013, when this, in 2014, that is 2 months after signing the agreement, most of the time was spent in putting up structures for the implementation of the agreement itself. The two governments delayed even in terms of naming the commission, the tripartite commission, which was supposed to implement the tripartite agreement. Also, there were discussions around the repatriation package, because the refugees could not return just like that. They had to be supported. And then the areas of return, in terms of infrastructure,
yes.
you know, there needed to be put up schools, you know, a provision of water, health facilities, and stuff like that. So if you look at 2014, about 485 refugees were able to be facilitated to return home. In 2015, slightly over 5,000 refugees, and in 2016, actually just in the first quarter of 2016, about 7,000 refugees. So I think it would be misplaced to say that this is not being addressed. Okay. Now, in terms of what we think is that clearly by closing the camps and disbanding the DRA, the government will be in violation of its international, regional, and national obligations to refugees. About 56% of refugees are women, children, and other vulnerable groups like youths. If you close the camps, where are these people going to go? The Department of Refugee Affairs is a very critical department in terms of coordinating the programs.
But it has been disbanded.
Which has now been disbanded. It also conducts a refugee status determination. That cannot happen. It issues movement passes. One person is already confirmed dead in Daadab because that person could not access or could not get a movement pass to travel to Nairobi for medical attention. So these are the issues that we are trying to bring to the attention of the government. To
clarify on this. Well, it isn't quite an immediate, it didn't just start, this whole process of repatriation. There has been an ongoing, as you said, since 2014, an ongoing voluntary move of refugees back. So there's this seeming notion that the government just woke up one day and decided to send the refugees back home. But it has been sold in the name of securing Kenya. And this is particularly the narrative as they justify the repatriation. I don't know your view on this particular issue, Bwana Macharia, as they, of course, call on something that is at the heart of every Kenyan: secure our borders.
This policies aimed at sending refugees back, I think it's become a cycle. And anytime the government wants more money from the West, it issues these threats. It did so in, I think, 2013, and immediately the Secretary of State, John Kerry, came here and I think gave us some 45 billion or something dollars. It has come up again. And you had Amina, the minister, very well, talking about how much refugees in Europe get, how well they are housed, how much money is spent on them. The Kenya government is basically saying, you give us the money so that we can look after these guys. Right. They're not sending them back. The logistics alone, we're saying that we can do it. You're talking about sending how many? 300,000 refugees back across to Somalia? That's on the lower side.
Right.
You're talking about how many trucks? Maybe 7,000 or almost 8,000 truckloads. We're not going to do it. The other thing is that you close the camps. Where are those people going to say to go? We're saying that the Kenya Defense Forces have secured southern Somalia so they can go there and they'll be at peace. That is hogwash. We saw what happened the other day. Right. The Kenya Defense Forces have not secured southern Somalia. In fact, they have even abandoned the camps they already had after that attack.
Funny how, as Bwana Macharia has brought this out, that the government seems to bring this up in an attempt to get more money. It's all about the money, is it?
I do not know where that perspective came from, but I do know that generally the humanitarian sector globally has become an industry, and people then tend to see human problems in terms of money. That's not how we do it. What the government is saying is that if you look at the refugee issue, I mean, refugees are managed under the same framework internationally. But if you see how refugees are facilitated in other parts of the world, and if you see how they are African refugees, we're not just talking about Kenyan. African refugees are generally neglected. There's no provision for them, even though the funds are obviously available, but they are allocated other places.
So then it follows.
So it places a very unfair burden on the host country.
Then it follows that maybe the request here is that if you give us better situation or an environment to take care of these refugees, then
actually,
we will maintain them.
if you heard what the ministers said, is that all this money they have been pledging to give, say, Kenya, or to put into supporting the refugees, they could have used that money to make homes for them back where they came from. You understand? It's actually, if you attended Honorable Nkaiseri's press conference, he was very clear about that money should probably be used instead in creating a better environment for them back home.
But
you see, what's happening is this. There's some sort of failure in the international community when it comes to particularly the Daadab refugee complex. These refugees came here 25 years ago. All right? A refugee status is supposed to be a temporary humanitarian relief,
right,
as we wait for something so that you can return or you move on somewhere else. 25 years down the line, it is very clear that it's no longer a temporary humanitarian relief. These people have become lifetime refugees.
But you make it sound like it's the same group.
They have been neglected by the international community. And Kenya is saying that we should revisit the whole idea that this humanitarian phenomenon is an international obligation shared by all members of the international community.
Well,
it seems, right now, that Kenya is being told you must underwrite this burden on behalf of the rest of the world. And it's a very unfair burden, considering that it comes with certain externalities. For instance, we're talking here about insecurity.
That's what I want us to get into.
We're talking about environmental degradation. We're talking about small arms,
yes,
smuggling, contraband,
proliferation,
poaching.
Yes. But we'll get to that, because now that's what the government is throwing out there in terms of justifying their move. And Gadar, you're really raring to go, but we have to take a break, my director tells me, and then we'll come back. And I'll start with Kwame first in telling us if it's really that simple to give them the money and they'll settle back home and build a better life for themselves back home. Stay with Presspass. We'll be back with more. Welcome back to Presspass, and as I start with Frederick Kwame, just some quick questions and clarifications that are being sought here. Marutit Kemboi says, is the international community funding refugees? And something else, Njoroge Jr., you should probably put this down. Njoroge Jr. says refugees should thank the government for all the time that they were accorded the shelter and settlement, perhaps to clarify that this is not an issue of being disgruntled or not being content with the help that Kenya has accorded so far. And also something else here by, let me just see, Somalia is not safe. This is Mr. White says, Somalia is not safe. How can you move 300,000 people at least only for them to be radicalized? That is a security threat in itself. Before we went on a break, there was the issue of security that was brought up by Eric Ngeno, and the Somalia government gave its response and said they hoped that the government would review its decision on this because sending them back home would actually pose a security threat. What's your position on this?
In fact, that is that would be our position. We have youth who are in Daadab and say Kakuma that are idle. Youth who have gone to school, they are well educated, and other people who do not have a source of livelihoods. These are people who could be taken advantage of, and they could be recruited to join Al-Shabaab, join forces with them. Mm-hmm. If you return people in the manner that the government wants to do, which is ideally forced repatriation, then these people will most likely revenge. And how do they revenge? Most likely they would join forces with Al-Shabaab and then conduct cross-border attacks into the country. Right. So I think we need to look at this issue in a sober manner so that we don't also hurriedly, rush into making decisions that might, be problematic to us.
Jerry looks like he's not convinced, but also
I don't quite buy that one.
Before that, yes. I wanted just to respond to one of the issues Ngeno raised. Yes. In terms of giving them money and going back to Somalia. I think repatriation is solely dependent on conditions in the areas of return. If you look at the tripartite agreement, it actually envisages that refugees will be given information on the conditions of return. When we started repatriation, we had only 3 locations. That was Luke, Baidoa, and Kismayo.
Voluntary repatriation.
For voluntary repatriation. Around mid last year, this was reviewed because other areas had been, what we would call probably pacified, and therefore could actually handle returnees. And so, as the conditions improve, then you're also upscaling repatriation.
Right.
So it's not that easy to say give them money and
let them settle.
Yeah, the other thing that has
themselves.
already happened is facilitation of the go and see, come and tell visit. That again is envisaged in the tripartite agreement.
Go and see, come and tell.
Yes, the refugees who have been facilitated to go to the areas of return. They spend a number of days there. They meet with leaders and other people. They're able to do security assessment and consult widely, and then come back and they're able to share stories.
Give a good report.
So if these people are saying it is not safe, who are we then to pass that judgment?
All right, there's something Mashari wants to say, but Gadara hasn't mentioned anything on this matter. But feel free to jump in. Don't wait to...
Okay, what I'm going to say is I don't quite buy the argument that it will increase the security problems in both Kenya and Somalia. If there has been an infiltration, it happened a long time ago. Kenya is already thoroughly infiltrated by, let's say, radicals. In fact, our problem now is not Somali radicals. They're within us, whether they are Somalis
our own youth
or whether they are Kenyans, our own youth. That is our biggest problem. If we can secure our borders, then we should be okay. But we have failed to secure our borders, and that is partly because of corruption. We may make excuses about our long, porous border and the ethnic mix there. I don't see the same kind of excuses happening in Ethiopia, where they don't have the same kind of corruption within security that we have. All the same, Kenya's security is paramount. We have been told by Nkaiseri that these refugee camps have are breeding grounds for terrorists. That may be an exaggeration, and maybe an excuse being provided because no evidence has ever been provided actually.
Yes.
But the government is tapping into what can be a very popular, what can be very popular sentiments. The fact is that Kenyans are quite tired of terrorism, and they have been conditioned to think that terrorists come from Somalia. They have been conditioned, we saw the other program in 2013, or forget something or other. They have been conditioned to think that if you have a Somali population coming into your, settling in Isli or South B or South C or wherever, then it is bringing terrorists. Now,
compromising the security.
Indirectly, that is what the government is telling us. But they do not really provide any evidence. True, there will be cells here and there, but they're not entirely from Somalia. Right. We have cells at the coast, we have cells everywhere. Okay. Many of the guys who have committed, been found for some of these activities are not Somali, they're Kenyans.
All right. Gadara, there's the issue of proliferation of arms and, of course, the radicalization of youth and organization of terrorist attacks through Daadab camps. That's what the government holds.
That's what the government claims. And as Mashari has said, it offers little evidence for this. I mean, we've had them blame everything from Westgate to poaching to gun running, Garissa on the Daadab, but never provided evidence. As far as I know, there's nobody who's been taken from the Daadab and charged with facilitating terrorism or anything like this. The fact is, this government has had, I mean, going back all the way to 2013, and actually before previous governments as well, they've had. They've been scapegoating refugees and people of Somali ethnicity especially for a very long time, blaming them for all manner of things. If you read the TJRC report, it actually elucidates that the people in the Northeastern are the guys who suffer the most, from the actions of the government itself. They form a convenient scapegoat. And there are certain, I think, facts that are inconvenient to the government's narrative. For example, they like to talk of refugees as a burden. Well, the World Bank did an economic survey of the Daadab last year in December, and it found Daadab actually pumps 1.4 billion shillings into our economy. That communities living next to Daadab actually earn something like 300 million shillings, every year. So this idea that refugees are simply taking away from us is actually wrong, and it's the same thing that used to be said, if you remember, about Isili, which then turned out to be this huge reservoir of talent, of entrepreneurship that's actually pumping money into our economy.
Right.
So it's not the truth that refugees are a burden. In fact, the way I see it, one of the big problems we have is a creation of ourselves, which is the policy of encamping refugees, which is something we decided to do. So we have these guys who come in, and it's not true that all of them have been here for 25 years. It's again a misreading of the fact the camp has been there. But these guys come in and go. If you remember in 2011 when we had the famine in Somalia, we had like 3,000 people coming across on a daily basis.
Right.
So some come, they stay, others when things improve go back. So it's not the truth that people simply come and stay.
Right.
The final thing is, when you're talking about resolving the problem isn't money. These people did not come here because they didn't have money in Somalia. That's not the reason they came. They came because Somalia was fundamentally unsafe, because you have a conflict going on. And the fact is that conflict is still there. Now, if you think about it, when we had the Elade attack, it took Kenya 4 days to reinforce the base, to get people to the base. That's by the telling of the KDF itself. Yet you're telling refugees that it is safe to go back. To go back where? Right. And what's the facilitation that's being made? So I'm quite happy to hear comments saying there is places being identified, etc. I mean, that is great. But to suggest that we can have this movement of 500,000 people because somehow there is a safe zone in Somalia, I think, is really misrepresenting the truth.
All right. There's been the question of whether media has been too sympathetic on humanitarian angle and not quite interrogating the angle of security. But then, is there evidence to show that there has been connection?
If you follow even the proceedings or the reports that come in connection with these terror attacks, you will not miss reference to the fact that either the passing of resources or arms, the refugee complexes are a very, very, very interesting space. It's a very interesting place. A lot of stuff can be arbitrated there. It's a whole economy there. Like he said, it's 1.4 billion shilling economy. That's a massive thing. The problem is that it's both licit and illicit economy. And quite a bit of stuff that would not find its way ordinarily is passed through that place. And there's a continuum from wherever they're coming from, small arms, even when you've poached, all sorts of things, smuggling of so much contraband. Yeah, there's so much. Even if you hear the sugar industry, you used to hear mumias. People are packaging, people are printing mumias bags so that they can go and get sugar which has been smuggled from pirated ships all the way through the refugee camps to the northern areas of Kenya. It's a whole thing there. Now, what has happened is that even the Africa Union's Peace and Security Council has noted and recognized that Daadab, especially the refugee complex, had been deeply infiltrated by these terrorist elements. You cannot deny Kenya the right to protect its own citizens.
All right, let me hold you on that point.
Just a moment. You cannot deny the country the right to protect itself, especially in ways that it sees fit.
All right.
The idea that Somali community is being victimized, I think, it's become a bit of a political football. The point being that once you have a whole population of people there who've been camping there for 25 years, some of whom engage in very unsavory activities, you cannot deny a country the right to defend itself, the right to take all measures, especially seeing where Kenya has come through. We have lost tourists. Investors do not like coming here much because we are rated as a very insecure country. Economic losses, humanitarian losses, all sorts of things that have come because of terrorist attacks. There is an emerging consensus that the fluxes of refugees across borders, they give criminal elements opportunities to also cross. One of the most
take advantage of.
one of the most haunting ones was that after the genocide in Rwanda, the Interahamwe joined the queues of refugees and went to Goma and other places with the refugees and went and reconsolidated in the camps. In Somalia, when as these guys are phased out, they come and pose as refugees and come and do their businesses here and start. You know, it's a thing. It's a real possibility. It's something that's happening, and I think Kenya should be given the right.
Fact. And I want Kwame to weigh in on this.
Kenya
Please
should have the right to
jump
defend
in on this particular issue, because you work with them. You've worked with them. You're the liaison, if you may.
Yeah. Mark, I think I have two responses for what my colleague is saying here. Now, first, when you talk about poaching and you're attributing refugees to poaching, don't we have anti-poaching laws? Why don't we implement that law? If we have bad elements, because the refugee community is just like any other refugee community. Go to Nyeri, people are stealing and others are raping and others are, grabbing land. Do you chase away a resident from Nyeri, or you actually deal with the culprits? So that is what we are saying. Go after the bad elements. If KDF went to Somalia in 2011, and they have been able to pacify huge chunks of Somaliland, why can't we use the same not KDF but security apparatus to get the bad elements out of the camps? I think closing the camps because of that nexus is actually amounting to collective punishment.
So you do confirm the illicit trade, proliferation of arms, and some element of radicalization or terrorists working within the camps, but is there a way that you can detect and report?
What has been happening is that the NGOs and UNHCR have already upscaled community policing, so that there is a very good and cordial working relationship between the security forces and the community. We already have in place what we call tango talks, and these are meetings that are organized between the police, the community leaders, humanitarian workers, and information is shared. Refugees have been encouraged to even share information, and they are not victimized in terms of, so-and-so came and reported this because of obvious reasons of security.
Yes.
So even though I did not confirm that there's this proliferation, it could be there. It could be there, but what we are saying is that there are laws that are supposed to deal with this. The other point, Mark, before I forget, is that the refugee camps should have sort of a civilian character. When asylum seekers cross the country, they undergo a process of refugee status determination. This process, involves a lot of checks, background checks, including information in the country of origin. So if you have the bad elements, like he was talking about in Interahamwe, who joined, the refugees, if you have such people, you are able to filter them out, and you cannot declare or you cannot grant them refugee status. So we already have laws in place, and this RSD, or refugee status determination process, is one of the is in the Refugees Act, which is the current law that we're using in the country. So if we are implementing this law, then we are able to filter out these people. So the question is this law being enforced? We have issues of border screening, which is not happening, and you cannot blame refugees for that. I mean, people just cross the border, and there's no security screening at the border. Right. You cannot be able to filter.
I think I think first of all, there is no doubt that there is a security threat from Somalia and that whole influx, whether it is in the refugee camps or with others who may have come and settled in the towns. That one you cannot discount. Al-Shabaab is the home of, Somalia is the home of Al-Shabaab, and Kenya has become one of its targets, and they have found easy ways to cross over. So in that regard, I'll agree with Eric here. But then he mentioned something about that whole illicit trade from Somalia, whether it is charcoal, whether it is sugar, or whether it is arms, or whether it is terrorists. It happens because of the corruption within our own and inefficiencies within our own systems. It is not necessarily through Daadab. You have seen big waves of it at the coast. So it is not just the camp that is the problem. It is our own inability to police and protect ourselves.
Right.
I think, I mean, when it comes down to it, when we talk about how we handle security here in Kenya, unfortunately, it's rarely, or it doesn't seem to be, an evidence-based approach. It is very easy for government to say refugees are a threat, but you've got 300,000 refugees. I mean, really, is a very tiny proportion, if at all, you know, that would pose a threat to the rest of us. And what we are doing is demonizing the entire group, you know. And we've seen this happen before. You know, we saw it during Usalama Watch, you know, where it was essentially the entire Somali community in Isili, you know, were suspects and being treated as suspects, being nabbed and being deported even.
Including Kenyans.
Yeah, including Kenyans, you know. So this sort of blunt instrument the government has, where it goes and it just says it's all of these people, you know, to me is problematic. And it actually tells us that the problem isn't Daadab. The problem is in our approach. Think about what happened at Westgate. They keep citing Westgate as something to do with Daadab. Yet they themselves have refused to carry out a proper inquiry into what happened at Westgate.
Right.
You know, and if you look at all the reports that were made, various ones through the press, etc., that are available, you hear different stories. You know, some that say they came through Uganda. Well, Uganda is nowhere near Daadab. You know, so we've got to be very careful when government simply throws out these things and attempts to paint the entire group as if the entire group poses a threat. This is not true. The entire group is not even a burden. You know, this is not true again.
Okay.
You know, so you have to be very careful to discriminate. And if they want to go into the camps, as he said, there are mechanisms that they can operate with and identify which are the rotten apples that we want to go. You know, go and get those.
Right.
But don't punish the entire group just for the actions of a few.
First, I think we lose the point when we start going into that sort of argumentation. First of all, I do not want us to dispute that Kenya has a right to secure itself.
I think everyone here agrees.
Number two, thank you very much. I'm glad about that. Number two, refugee status is not supposed to be permanent. Refugee settlements are not supposed to be, you know, settlements like those. It's supposed to be a temporary refuge. Number three, the international community. It is very clear, even when you see how Kome is, Kome has had to adapt, for instance, to this idea that the refugee phenomenon is going to be an ongoing thing for the indeterminate future. You can see there's no particular end game. The numbers is talking about 3,000, 1,500. You can see it's just an optional thing, but Daadab is supposed to be there forever. Kenya is overburdened right now with so much security concerns. I mean, you're talking about Boni Forest, you're talking about Somalia, you're talking about securing our urban areas, you're talking about intelligence gathering and all these corporations and all these, you know, they say they're going after, you know, soft targets and so on and so forth. There's a lot of work. Now, if after doing all that, we decide that, for instance, Daadab is a threat, not because of all the refugees inside there, but because the ones who are there are lethal enough to do a Westgate, to do a Garissa University, to do that sort of thing. They're lethal enough like that. What is wrong with Kenya saying we need to close this camp? In the interest, in the national interest, because security is everything.
It is, and we need to secure our,
so we
our
need
boundaries.
we say we close that camp. We're not saying we are victimizing all those, but we are saying Kenya, 40 million people.
Evidence of many people who are,
40 million people are at risk here.
There's a question there, and
where is
issue
that
the
evidence? Where is it?
You said their report, but the question of evidence, because that's what people want to have, hard evidence of the connection.
How come no refugee has been taken, you know, in front of a court of law and charged with a security-related offense? You know, let me finish. You talk about the Daadab being there for 25 years. Well, Angelina Jolie, who's a representative of UNHCR, today had a thing on BBC where she says the average displacement across the world of refugees is 20 years. We talk about Daadab as if it is unique, you know. lots of refugees in other places have stayed longer. I mean, you just need to go to Palestine and see guys who've been refugees since 1948. You know, so let's not paint this as if we are somehow unique. We are the only ones where refugees come and they stay for long.
For 25 years.
Yeah. The second thing is, if you don't solve the problem at the source where it is, you know, then it seems to me foolhardy to expect people to return. What they fled from is still there. The third thing is, if today we were to close Daadab as the government wishes, you know, what happens? I mean, we already have food stress, reports of food stress in northern Somalia. You know, if that comes south, you know, we might end up in a situation that we had in 2011, where we've got 3,000 people coming across the border. Where do you take them?
Right.
You know, so this seems to me is very short-term thinking. There is no planning about it. There is no thinking about it. It really seems to me scapegoating a whole group of people. You know, and you might say they don't want to victimize them, but that's what it amounts to.
But do you realize when we speak about this issue, we're speaking as if it's Kenya's sole obligation. We forget that the international community is supposed to be integrally involved in this thing.
But
I think
the international community is funding
Well,
the entire upkeep of those camps,
yes.
plus even funding the Kenya security forces who were active in that area.
Yeah.
That was what was extracted from John Kerry last time around, and maybe more will be extracted again. What I find interesting about this is the timing, because obviously we are out to make we're out to profit from what is happening in Europe right now. Europe has its own refugee crisis. In a way, we will also be calling out their own hypocrisy, because when they say our board, oh no, we can't allow these guys, they are a threat. Already, initially they were saying we can take them, then they realized that it's impossible to filter them, as we're saying we can do. It's not easy to filter guys you don't know who have no record, to filter them, and it's just not possible. So keep them all out.
The reason they wouldn't take them is because there was resistance among local
One
communities.
conclusion,
I want to respond to this issue, and I do agree with you, that refugee status is not permanent. We actually have what we call durable solutions in the law for refugees, and one of them is voluntary repatriation of refugees. The second one is resettlement. I think the conversation we should have now is just to call on international community to increase the resettlement quotas, because that is one of the durable solutions envisaged in international law and even in our own law. Then there is another thorny one, which is the local integration. Why not think about dismantling or closing the camps, and then we open up settlements, which are, say, modeled akin to what is happening in Uganda, where people can integrate with the host communities, they can engage in livelihood activities, they have much more rights, they are not under a lot of restrictions like we have in Daadab. So when you put people together, so many people together, then you have a recipe for chaos. Why not engage in this conversation around local integration as one of the durable solutions? Why only close and return?
In fact, the whole policy of encamping refugees, for me,
exactly,
I mean, it's quite problematic. Is what creates this issue. It concentrates 500,000 people in one place. I mean, there will be obvious effects of doing this. So we have to be careful about that. The solutions that we come up with don't make situations worse. You know?
Yes.
The other thing is, I mean, Tanzania took in Burundian refugees, actually accorded them citizenship, as Tanzanian citizens, So these aren't unprecedented things, We can actually think beyond simply saying kick them out of the country. This isn't a fifth column, as some people refer to them, somewhere where Shabab comes. No.
Daadab, and we're discussing refugees from Somalia, and even all the justification being offered is about security, insecurity emanating from Somalia. But we forget that there are also other refugees in Kenya. We have a good number of Sudanese refugees, both South Sudan and the other Sudan, Ethiopian, and even Congo and Rwanda, and those places. Now, all of them have been tarred with the same brush that all refugees must go because of a bad lot here, which basically is manifestly unfair, and that's what persuades me that all this thing is just an excuse to make noise, get international attention, and finally extract more money from the...
Extract more money from this. And I'll get the response in terms of if this money will end up to the government and to what use. But Kwame, as this story is being told by media and how we treat this particular issue, have we broken down the question of when we look at repatriation? Does it involve all Somalis, or is it, as Mr. Macharia has pointed out, also Sudanese refugees? Who does this involve and who does this affect? And is this in effect immediate, as it's being made to seem or sound? And then if we have clarified, what will be the consequences of such in your analysis?
Yeah, the decision does not leave out any refugee in the country. I know in some of the media reports by the minister, he said that they are only focusing on Daadab. But when he went ahead to gazette the task force to implement this decision, one of the terms of reference is actually to come up with modalities for the task force, is to come up with modalities on repatriation of refugees in Kenya. So
all
that
refugees.
actually includes refugees in urban areas, refugees in Kakuma, refugees in Daadab. So we're actually looking at over 600,000 people. We are not only limiting ourselves to 340,000.
Right.
So what we have now is a humanitarian catastrophe. If this indeed happens, there's no way you can return all these people without conditions on the other side having improved in terms of security, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of water and stuff like that.
Yes.
The second thing is that you have children who are going to school. You're then going to disconnect them from education when you implement such a decision. So I think the conversation should be around those issues
and should keep going.
Yeah.
When these proposals first came up a few years ago, I had some discussion with some leaders in northeastern provinces from Garissa, and their concern was that closing the refugee camps will deny their own people the economic spin-offs. They tell me that people are actually sending their children to the refugee camps, because there they'll be guaranteed an education, they'll be guaranteed shelter, they'll be guaranteed food, and possibly also a chance of repatriation to the of resettlement in the US or Canada or Sweden or wherever. In fact, it is possible that of all the Somali refugees who have got to settlement in the US and other places, a good number are actually Kenyans.
Right. Are people taking advantage of these loopholes? And
Certainly.
Mr. Kwame, would you confirm this?
Yeah, it is possible. We have people who have registered as refugees who are also Kenyans. I think about 40,000 of them. But they took advantage of that because I mean, when you look at the northeastern region, at times there is drought and famine, and these people registered just to access food. But then later on, they wanted to get out of the two databases, the government database and the other one, and vice versa. Right. You also have refugees who bribed their way and probably got the Kenyan IDs. Again, this is a question of corruption you was talking about. So if you have such people, they might beat the system, but the resettlement process is a long one. It involves verification at very many points.
So perhaps it holds for some that if some are beating the system and they're Kenyans and they register as refugees, then those are the ones the government is bringing concern over security. They are actually elements of terror outfits.
No, it was,
in registration.
I think he was talking more of whether they accessed resettlement, right?
That is true. But I'm saying if there is a concern and you can confirm that some would beat the system in terms of registering themselves as refugees, then there are those elements who are part of outfits who then come in and infiltrate.
No doubt about that.
It's true.
I don't think anyone has a capacity to filter everybody and decide this is a good guy or not.
But we have to keep in mind that the government itself, I think, was it in 2011 or at some point, had suspended registering refugees. You know, so it's not sort of an innocent partner here. You know,
Yes.
it's a time when refugees might have wanted to register, but government wasn't doing it.
And so
you know, so
those
when
are
they
big
turn
leap
around and they say, well, no, this is all on the refugees, it's again untrue. It's scapegoating, and that's what they've been doing for a very long time.
Eric.
And some of these refugees might have wanted to register as Kenyans just to probably access movement.
Yeah.
Because I mean, when you're encamped, you're like in a prison. You're not allowed to move out. Currently, before the disbandment of the Department of Refugee Affairs, and in 2014, end of 2014, you remember there was the Security Laws Amendment Act that was passed. Later on, the two camps were gazetted as the only recognized refugee hosting areas. With that, it meant that all refugees needed to be in the camps. But the department
But was that
also...
enforced? I know there are many refugees, and not just Somalis, who live in the communities.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm getting to that.
Yeah.
So when this happened, the department issued exemptions. One of them is people who are studying, in public schools like universities, and that is the whole issue of education. Right. We have people going for resettlement, and we have medical cases. And we have maybe those that might have serious protection and security concerns who are allowed to be out of the camps. Right. So the other caseload, literally you are supposed to be encamped, and without valid justifications you cannot move around. So I mean, any person could want to register just to move around.
You see the shift in this conversation, it always ends up on the assumption, standing on the assumption that refugee camps, the Daadab refugee complex is an eternal establishment that's not supposed to go anywhere. And as long as we have that sort of mindset, we really cannot go out towards solutions. One of the better solutions is, for example, to facilitate these people's resettlement back in their home countries. And that involves a lot of concerted international activity that is not taking place right now. Everybody is happy to throw money at the camps and forget about them. Now, a refugee is a person whose capabilities and rights are seriously curtailed by their circumstances that they have nothing to do with most of the time. To say that these people should stay there for as long as they are is to say that you want to downgrade a certain large population, forever. We should be thinking in terms of increasing these people's capability by taking them back to where they can function optimally, by making sure that all the conditions are necessary for them to settle successfully,
but can
are
they,
established.
If the stability of their country is not guaranteed?
Stability is also an international obligation.
So you're throwing it back to the international community.
Yes.
But this
stability, resettlement,
closing the camp is not going to bring Somalia stable.
That is true, but now currently, as we are speaking here, it is not safe.
Yeah.
I mean, that is what we are saying. So I agree with you. It is an international obligation. So let's call on the international community to fix Somalia first, before then we move on to the...
Now we are hurting here. We have got two people. Somebody else is saying, I am hurting because this person is stepping on my toe. And this guy says, I'm stepping on his toe because I'm also hurting. Yeah? So I think first of all, one of the preventable, the stoppable, if you can stop some sort of injustice, for instance, denying Kenya its right to secure itself, I think it would be the greater injustice
here. But the camps aren't denying Kenya its right to secure itself. I think that's the whole point.
I think we must get to this mental frame where we understand that the foundation of everything that we stand for as a country here is security. We can't be in this studio, we can't go to the stock exchange, we can't trade, we can't build railways, we can't go to school unless we have security.
And that's been the
I agree
underlying
with Eric
narrative.
to an extent.
We
We may recall that there was a time we had some 300,000 Ugandan refugees in Kenya from the Idi Amin days. But once Uganda was secured and it became safe, there was no problem. They went back.
Yeah.
So the same thing would apply here in the case of Somalis. But the thing is that Somalia is not yet safe for anybody, not even for Kenyan forces. Secondly, if those guys go back and find they are still in danger, they could flood back. And now they will not flood back to the camp.
Because you closed it.
Because they will flood back into Garissa town, and on to Nairobi, Mombasa, and anywhere else they can find a place where they can,
and that
where
is
they can
perhaps
blend.
why the Somali government is saying that this will just expose the country to other elements.
Well, I'm not so interested in the security of the Somali government, but we have our own security issues to deal with.
It is a
For me,
possibility.
if we are going to have refugees, then I'd rather they be confined in camps where they can be monitored, rather than roaming all over the place where they might be a threat.
I disagree with.
Of course, you would, yes.
With Macharia there.
And now this is our last comment.
Yeah,
as,
I think the whole idea of refugees as a threat, for me, is fundamentally flawed. You know,
and you've said it's a
these are
scapegoat.
human beings looking, you know, for shelter from, and they're running away from the very people who we are fighting. In fact, they should be our allies, you know, in this fight. But we are treating them as if they are part of Al-Shabaab or potentially terrorists, all of them. You know, if we have a problem with a few of them, then let's go after those few. You know, I don't have a problem with us saying that, okay, so and so we suspect, let's find out. You know, that is even allowed for in our own laws, you know, where the minister in charge, and Kaisar in this case, can actually deport somebody after going through the process of law. And right. the law, the Refugee Act insists on this. You know, so this idea of simply branding entire groups of people, you know, as a security threat, you know, is by, and my final point will be this, is we see this happening to refugees. It never occurs to us that the very same thing can be turned against us, that entire groups of Kenyans can be regarded by their own government as problematic. We've seen it happen with Muslims. We've seen it happen with people of Somali descent, you know. So let's not think that this is simply a refugee issue, insisting that the government...
All young men in Murang'a
precisely.
who were suspected Mungiki, and they were slaughtered.
So precisely. So insisting that the government respects, and I think it is on about duty-bound to do this, to respect the humanity of every person on Kenyan soil. It doesn't matter whether he bears an ID to say he's a Kenyan citizen. The fact that he's here is a human being, he deserves respect, and the government needs to accord him that respect. Okay. Because that is a protection not just for him, it's a protection for all the rest of us.
All right, Bwana Kome, as we're winding up, your desire in terms of how the story is told moving forward, we've looked at some of the themes, underlying narratives, and the things that need to be clarified. Your wish being from the Refugee Consortium of Kenya.
Mark, in 1997, January, Tanzania returned about 227 Burundian refugees, forcibly back home. 221 of those refugees were executed. What we are saying is real, that if you return all these refugees together in a hurried manner, then you're actually endangering their lives. Right. Our call to the government is to reconsider this whole issue. Yes. Be amenable to dialogue. So that together we can look at sustainable ways and other, you know, durable solutions for refugees. We should not pass a collective punishment through closure of the camps, and indeed, actually, the government should revoke the decision of disbanding the Department of Refugee Affairs, so that it can continue to offer the critical services that it was offering before its disbandment.
Right. And are you involved in the consultative process with the task force that has been set up to give a report by the end of this month?
We have not received any call from them. We indeed do not know whether they've actually even met. But it is something that we would also be interested in terms of engaging with them, and so that we can see how best this can be handled. But definitely, our voice into that task force will be looking especially on the timelines, because we do not agree that November is a good time frame for return of all the refugees in the country. Okay. The government is purporting to act under the tripartite agreement, which is expiring around November. But on the other hand, they are talking about all refugees in the country. The tripartite agreement is for only Somali refugees. It is not for Sudanese. So I think there is a mix there. Okay. Yes. And the tripartite agreement also envisages a situation whereby within the 3-year period, up to November this year, perhaps all the Somali refugees will not have returned home. That is why one of the clauses there is that the parties could even extend the period or the duration within which voluntary repatriation can be conducted.
And
so I think we still can renegotiate this document so that we have realistic timelines for voluntary repatriation, and so that no one is forced to return home. They only make decisions out of their own free will.
Any room for reconsideration and consultation with the stakeholders, and also what you would desire to come out as themes and perspectives in the story being told?
First, I think we need to listen to ourselves also sometimes. You've had the Minister for Foreign Affairs and International Trade speak to this matter. You've had the Minister for Interior speak to this matter. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees is on board. That's the person mandated by the international community to handle all refugee affairs, including repatriation and resettlement. The federal government of Somalia is in this matter. Who are we, if Somalia is willing to take back refugees, who are we to tell them that you cannot take back your people?
But they
and most importantly,
it's a timeline, I would imagine.
Most importantly, I think what we need to do is look at those fundamental tenets of this whole phenomenon. First of all, refugees are an international obligation of all members of the international community. Secondly, this country deserves, Kenya deserves, like every other country, to be safe for its people.
Right.
I think that's a plea. I'm willing to say, please, tafadhali, we deserve to be.
And you'd hope that this
And
remains as a
you
thematic.
read even news reports recently that, okay, don't worry, I do not want to look like I'm still accusing refugees of perpetrating crimes. But we need to consider that there's this task force that is going to put together the mechanics, the logistics of actually closing this thing, with a process
systematically
that is systematic and that is credible. So I think Kome, Kadara, no one should, jump the gun. Let's wait and see what logistics should be put together. Let us try to participate if we can. Let us try to, inform that process.
Well,
but let us not say that Kenya desires to always host these refugees.
Well,
we desire every country to have its people.
Well, it's not quite jumping the gun that you've had. You say, I want Macharia to talk about the story moving forward. Are we jumping the gun here, or are we helping shape the conversation around?
I think we could do more in terms of better analysis of the situation, of the government's intentions, the situation on the ground regarding refugees, whether in Daadab or Kakuma, and also the situation on the ground where they are supposed to go back. Personally, I'd like to see the camps closed